In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a charming newcomer, Leela Vance, hides a deadly secret blackmail, theft, and maybe murder. When Mr. Harrow dies mysteriously, only sharp-eyed Miss Jane Marple suspects foul play. With a clever disguise. As a chatty widow, she slips into Leela's world, unravels her lies, and sets a daring trap to catch a killer. Will Miss Marple's wits outsmart a cunning villain before the village falls prey? Dive into a tale of secrets, courage, and one old lady's unstoppable quest for truth. Chapter 1. The Village Whisper.st. Mary Mead was a sleepy little village, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business, but nobody liked to admit it. The cottages sat snug along winding lanes, their gardens bursting with roses and daisies. The church steeple poked into the sky, and the village green was where kids played and old folks gossiped. It was peaceful, mostly. But lately, something felt off. Things went missing: Mrs. Baker's silver brooch, Mr. Tuttle's pocket watch, even a fancy scarf from the vicar's wife. Then there were those strange notes, slipped under doors at night with scratchy handwriting that said things like, "I know what you did." Nobody could figure out who wrote them, but they made people jumpy. And then, worst of all, Mr. Harrow dropped dead. The doctor called it a heart attack, but the village buzzed with questions. Was it really just his heart? Or was something darker going on? Miss Jane Marple, a tiny old lady with sharp blue eyes, sat in her cozy cottage by the window. Her hands worked fast, knitting a soft pink scarf, the needles clicking like a clock. She looked like any other grandmother with her neat white hair and sensible shoes, but her mind was sharper than a tack. She watched the world outside Mrs. Price hurrying to the shop. Young Tommy chasing his dog, the postman pedaling his bike. Nothing escaped her. She'd lived in St. Mary Mead her whole life, and she knew people. Not just their names or what they ate for supper, but how they thought, what they hid, what made them tick. People are like books, she often thought. You just have to read them, right? Mr. Harrow's death didn't sit well with her. He'd been a quiet man, living alone in a big house at the edge of the village. He didn't talk much, didn't go to church or the pub, but he wasn't mean, just private. Folks said he was rich once, before his wife died, but now he kept two. Himself, tending his garden or reading old books. So why would his heart give out so sudden? He was only 60, not old at all. Miss Marple's needles paused as she frowned. Hearts don't just stop, she murmured, not without a reason. The village had its own ideas. At the tea shop, Mrs. Baker swore Mr. Harrow drank too much whiskey. At the butcher's, Mr. Tuttle said he'd been sick for years. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, whispered about bad blood in the family, though she wouldn't explain what she meant. Miss Marple listened to it all, sipping tea or buying stamps at the post office, her face calm and polite. She never argued, never pushed, but she stored every word like a squirrel hiding nuts. Gossip was messy, but sometimes it held a speck of truth. What really caught her ear was talk about Mrs. Lila Vance. Lila was new to St. Mary Mead, arriving just 3 months ago. She rented a pretty cottage on Lilac Lane with roses climbing the walls. She was maybe 40, with shiny dark hair and a smile that made men tip their hats. She dressed fancy silk scarves, gold earrings, and spoke with a smooth voice, like she'd been to fancy schools. Everyone liked her. She brought cakes to church, helped at the school fair, even sang in the choir. But Miss Marple wasn't so sure. Something about Lila felt off. Like a picture hung just a bit crooked. Lila had gotten chummy with Mr. Harrow. Fast, too fast, Miss Marple thought. She'd seen them walking together, Lila laughing at something he said, her hand on his arm. Mr. Harrow wasn't the laughing type, so what was she after? His money, his secrets. Miss Marple didn't know yet, but she aimed to find out. People don't change their ways for no reason, she thought, her needles clicking again. And Lila's ways are mighty curious. The missing things and Creepy notes started around the same time Lila showed up. Coincidence? Maybe. But Miss Marple didn't trust coincidences. She remembered a story from years ago when a charming stranger came to the village and swindled half the shopkeepers before vanishing. Lila wasn't like that man. She was too smart to be so obvious, but the feeling was the same. A wolf in a sheep's wool, as her father used to say. Miss Marple leaned closer to the window, watching Lila now. She was crossing the green, a basket of apples in her arm. Chatting with Mrs. Price, Lila's laugh carried on the breeze, bright and easy, but her eyes darted around. Like she was checking who was watching, Mrs. Price nodded, smiling, but as soon as Lila walked away, her face changed, like she'd tasted something sour. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Mrs. Price doesn't trust her either, she thought. Good. I'm not alone. She set her knitting down and poured a cup of tea, thinking hard. If Mr. Hero was murdered Dan, she was starting to believe he was. The killer would be clever. Poison, maybe, or something sneaky that looked natural. The notes and thefts could be tied to it. A way to stir up trouble and keep folks distracted. But why? And who? Lila was the obvious choice, but Miss Marple knew better than to jump to conclusions. The obvious is often a trap, she reminded herself. She needed proof, and that meant watching, listening, and maybe poking her nose where it didn't belong. The trouble was, everyone knew her. Miss Marple wasn't just Jane to the village. She was the lady who noticed everything. If she started asking questions, the killer would hear about it. She needed a way to snoop without being spotted. A disguise, perhaps. The idea made her chuckle. Me in a wig and spectacles. Oh, Jane, you're getting bold in your old age. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She could become someone else, someone nobody would suspect. A nosy visitor, maybe, or a silly old aunt. She'd done it once before, years ago, when she helped catch a thief at a friend's house. It could work again. She sipped her tea, her mind racing. First, she needed to get closer to Lila. The sewing circle was a start. Lila had joined it, probably to seem friendly. Miss Marple could go, but not as herself. She'd need a new name, a new look. And she'd need to be careful. If Lila was a killer, she'd be watching for trouble. One wrong move, and Miss Marple could end up like Mr. Harrow. The village clock chimed 3. And Miss Marple glanced outside again. Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's nephew, was walking past, his shoulders slumped. He was a lanky boy, barely 20, who'd come to St. Mary Mead after his uncle died. He'd inherited the house and whatever money was left, but he didn't seem happy about it. Miss Marple wondered why. Was he scared, guilty, or just sad? She'd have to talk to him, but not yet. For now, she'd watch. She picked up her knitting, her fingers moving automatically. The village was like her scarf full of loops and knots, each one connected. Pull the right thread and the whole thing would unravel. She just had to find that thread. Lila was part of it, she was sure. But there was more to this puzzle. The notes, the thefts, the death, they all fit together somehow. And Miss Marple was determined to figure out how, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky pink, she made a plan. Tomorrow, she'd visit Much Benham, the nearest town, to buy what she needed for her disguise. A wig, some clothes, maybe glasses to change her face. She'd tell everyone she was visiting her cousin, so nobody would wonder where she'd gone. Then, as her new self, she'd join the sewing circle and get close to Lila. She'd listen, smile, and let Lila think she was just another silly old lady. But all the while, she'd be watching, piecing together the truth. Miss Marple smiled to herself, her eyes twinkling. You may be clever, Mrs. Vance, she thought, but I've been unraveling mysteries longer than you've been alive. She finished her tea and stood, her mind buzzing with ideas. The village might be fooled, but not Jane Marple. Not yet. She walked to her bookshelf and pulled out an old journal, flipping to a blank page. In her neat handwriting, she jotted down what she knew. Mr. Harrow, dead, heart attack, poison. Lila Vance knew too friendly scene with Harrow. Missing items. Brooch, watch, scarf, notes, threatening, anonymous. Tom Harrow. Nervous, inherited house. She tapped her pen, then added, Lila's eyes always watching. Guilty. She closed the journal and tucked it away. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Outside, the village settled into evening. Lights glowed in cottage windows, and the air smelled of wood smoke and damp grass. Miss Marple stood by her door, looking out at the quiet streets. Somewhere out there a killer might be hiding, thinking they'd gotten away with it. But they didn't know Jane Marple. And that, she thought, was their biggest mistake. She turned back inside, her heart steady. Tomorrow, the game would begin. She'd play her part, wear her disguise, and dig until the truth came out. For Mr. Harrow, for the village, for herself. Because if there was one thing Miss Marple knew, it was this. No secret stayed buried forever. Not in St. Mary Mead, not when she was watching. Chapter 2. The Garden Party Ploy. The sun shone bright over St. Mary Mead, casting a warm glow on the vicarage garden. Roses bloomed in neat rows. Bees buzzed lazily, and the air smelled of fresh grass and lemonade. The village had turned out. For the garden party, a grand idea Miss Jane Marple had quietly planted in the mind of Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife. They'll bring everyone together, Miss Marple had said, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. After all this trouble, we need a bit of cheer. Mrs. Clement agreed, eager to play hostess, never suspecting Miss Marple's real plan, to watch Mrs. Lila Vance like a hawk. Without anyone guessing why Miss Marple stood near the tea table, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, her white hair tucked under a plain straw hat. She looked like any other old lady fussing over a plate of scones, but her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. The garden was alive with chatterkids chasing each other, men talking about cricket, women swapping recipes. It was the perfect place to blend in, to listen, to see who Lila talked to and how she acted. If Lila was up to something, as Miss Marple suspected, this party would show it. People let their guard down when they thought nobody was watching. She sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to Lila, who stood out like a peacock in a flock of sparrows. Lila wore a dazzling emerald dress that hugged her figure, her dark hair swept up in a fancy twist. She laughed with Mr. Tuttle, the butcher, her gold earrings catching the sunlight. Everyone seemed to like her. Mrs. Baker smiled. The vicar nodded. Even grumpy old Mr. Price tipped his hat. But Miss Marple wasn't fooled. Charm was a mask, and she'd seen masks slip before. Lila's smile was too perfect, her laugh too loud. She's playing a part, Miss Marple thought, her knitting needles tucked in her bag, ready for a quiet moment. But what's behind it? The party had been easy to arrange. Miss Marple knew Mrs. Clement loved a chance to show off her garden, and the village was itching for something to talk about besides Mr. Harrow's death and those creepy notes. She dropped the idea over tea last week, saying a party might lift spirits, don't you think? Mrs. Clement jumped at it, and soon invitations were out, tables were set, and the whole village was buzzing. Miss Marple had even suggested inviting Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's nephew, to help him feel welcome. Really, she wanted to watch him too. He'd been jumpy since he arrived, and she wondered why now, as she nibbled a cucumber sandwich. Miss Marple scanned the crowd. Tom stood by the hedge alone, holding a glass of lemonade he hadn't touched. He was tall and thin, with messy brown hair and eyes that darted around like a scared rabbit's. He didn't talk much, just nodded. When people offered condolences about his uncle, Miss Marple noticed Lila glance at him, her smile fading for a split second before snapping back. Interesting, Miss Marple thought. She's watching him as much as I'm watching her. She moved closer, pretending to admire the roses, her ears tuned to the chatter. Mrs. Baker was telling Mrs. Price about her missing brooch, her voice low but sharp. It was my mother's solid silver, gone right off my dresser. I swear someone's been in my house. Mrs. Price nodded, clutching her own scarf tighter as if it might vanish too. Miss Marple filed that away. The thefts were part of this puzzle, she was sure. And Leela's arrival lined up with them too neatly to ignore. Leela was now talking to the vicar, her voice sweet as honey. Such a lovely party, Reverend Clement. St. Mary Mead is so welcoming. The vicar beamed, but Ms. Marple caught Leela's eyes flicking toward Tom again. She was subtle, but not subtle enough. Ms. Marple decided to test her. She shuffled over, her face all smiles, and said, "Mrs. Vance, you've settled in so nicely. Did you know Mr. Harrow well? Such a shame about him." Leela's smile didn't waver, but her eyes tightened, just for a moment. "Oh, poor Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice smooth. "We chatted a few times, about his garden mostly. He was so kind, but so private. I don't think he had many friends." She sighed, looking sad, but Miss Marple wasn't buying it. Lila's words were too careful, like she'd practiced them. And that pause before she answered was a hair too long. "Such a tragedy," Miss Marple said, nodding. "And his nephew Tom, all alone now. Have you met him?" She watched Lila closely, her face bland as porridge. Lila glanced at Tom, then back. Briefly, she said, "He seems shy. I hope he's coping." Her tone was perfect, but her fingers twisted the edge of her scarf, a tiny sign of nerves. Miss Marple smiled and moved on, her mind buzzing. Lila knew more about Tom than she let on, and she was edgy about it. Why? She found a bench under a shady tree and sat pulling out her knitting to look busy. The needles clicked, giving her an excuse to keep her eyes on the crowd. Tom was still by the hedge, but now Leela was heading his way, her walk confident, her smile back in place. Miss Marple's fingers slowed as she watched. Leela said something to Tom, and he flinched, like she'd startled him. He mumbled a reply, his face red, and Leela laughed, touching his arm. Tom looked like he wanted to bolt, but he stayed, trapped by politeness. Miss Marple's needles stopped. She's after something, she thought, but what? His money, his uncle's secrets. Mr. Harrow's estate wasn't huge, but it included a house and some savings enough to tempt a schemer. Or maybe Lila thought Tom knew something about those notes or thefts. Either way, Tom was nervous, and Lila was circling him like a cat with a mouse. She tucked her knitting away and strolled toward the tea table, where Mrs. Clement was pouring cups for a gaggle of women. Miss Marple joined them, her ears open. The talk was about Mr. Harrow, now how he'd been seen arguing with someone a week before he died, though nobody knew who. "He was in his garden, shouting," said Mrs. Baker. "I couldn't hear much, but he sounded angry." Miss Marple tilted her head, curious. "Was it a man or a woman?" she asked, her voice mild. Mrs. Baker frowned. "Hard to say, I was too far off. But he wasn't happy, that's for sure." The women clucked, moving on to gossip about the schoolteacher's new hat, but Miss Marple's mind stayed on that argument. Had it been Lila or someone else? She needed more clues. As the afternoon wore on, the party grew louder, kids running wild, men laughing over pints. Miss Marple kept moving, chatting here, listening there, her plain dress and hat making her invisible. She overheard Leela mention a keepsake Mr. Harrow had promised her, a locket, she said, with his wife's picture. "He wanted me to have it," Leela told Mrs. Price, her eyes wide and earnest. "But I haven't found it yet." "Maybe Tom knows where it is?" Mrs. Price nodded, but Miss Marple's stomach tightened. Mr. Harrow wasn't the type to give gifts, especially not to a woman he barely knew. Was Lila lying or fishing for something? She glanced at Tom, who was now talking to the vicar, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked miserable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy. He was young, out of his depth, and Leela was circling. But was he just a victim, or did he know something too? She'd have to talk to him, but not today. Today was for watching. The sun began to dip. turning the sky golden. Miss Marple helped Mrs. Clement clear plates, her mind sorting through what she'd seen. Leela was charming, but her charm was a tool, used to get what she wanted. She'd been too quick to mention that locket, too eager to talk to Tom. And Tom was scared of Lila, maybe, or of something else. The argument in Mr. Harrow's garden, the missing locket, the notes, the thefts, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. Miss Marple just needed to fit them together. As she carried a tray of cups to the vicarage kitchen, she thought about her next move. The sewing circle was tomorrow, and Leela would be there. It was the perfect chance to get closer, but Miss Marple couldn't go as herself. Everyone knew her as the nosy old lady who saw too much. She needed her disguise, the one she'd planned to buy in Much Benham. Tomorrow, she'd slip away, become someone new, and join the circle as a stranger. Mila wouldn't suspect a thing. She smiled to herself, setting the tray down. "You're clever, Mrs. Vance," she thought. "But I've got a trick or two up my sleeve." The party was winding down, families heading home, kids trailing balloons. Miss Marple took one last look at the garden. Lila was saying goodbye to Mrs. Clement, her smile as bright as ever. Tom was already gone, vanished into the dusk. The village looked peaceful, but Miss Marple knew better. Something dark was hiding here, and she was going to find it. She walked home slowly, her hat shielding her eyes from the setting sun. Her cottage was quiet, the fire crackling as she lit it. She sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, and thought about Lila's face, those quick glances, that nervous twist of her scarf. "You're hiding something," Miss Marple whispered. But not for long. Tomorrow, the game would shift. She'd step into her disguise, play her part, and start pulling at the threads of this mystery. Because if there was one thing Jane Marple knew, it was that secrets always came undone. Always. Chapter 3. The disguise takes shape. The morning air was crisp in St. Mary Mead. With a hint of autumn creeping into the breeze, Miss Jane Marple stood in her cozy cottage, her knitting tucked away for once, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the mirror. Today was no ordinary day. She had a plan, a bold one, and it started with becoming someone else. If she was going to get close to Mrs. Lila Vance without raising suspicion, she couldn't be the nosy Miss Marple everyone knew. She needed a disguise, a new face to fool the village and a killer. Her lips twitched into a smile. "Jane, you're getting adventurous in your old age," she murmured. But her heart thumped with excitement. The garden party yesterday had confirmed her suspicions. Lila was charming, too charming, and her interest in Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's nephew, was no accident. That story about a locket Mr. Harrow supposedly promised her? It didn't add up. Mr. Harrow was a private man, not the type to give gifts to a woman he'd known for weeks. And Tom's nervous glances, the way he flinched when Lila spoke to him, it all pointed to something deeper. The missing brooch, the creepy notes, Mr. Harrow's sudden deaths, they were connected, and Lila was at the heart of it. Miss Marple was sure. But to prove it, she needed to slip into Lila's world, and that meant a transformation. She'd been up early, planning. Her trip to Much Benham, a bustling town, a short train ride away. Nobody in St. Mary Mead would blink if she said she was visiting her cousin. Virit was a story she'd used before. But instead of tea and gossip, she'd be shopping for a new identity. A wig, some clothes, maybe glasses to change her look. She'd done this once years ago when a friend's maid was stealing silver, and it had worked like a charm. Now she'd do it again, but the stakes were higher. If Leela was a killer, one wrong step could be dangerous. Miss Marple checked her purse, counting the crisp bills she'd tucked inside. Enough for what she needed, plus a bit extra for emergencies. She pulled on her plain gray coat and a scarf, her usual outfit, nothing flashy. The village knew her as the quiet spinster who knitted and sipped tea, and she'd keep it that way, until her disguise was ready. She locked her cottage door, glancing at the roses climbing the wall. I'll be back soon, she told them, as if they could hear. Then she set off for the station, her steps brisk, but not hurried. No need to draw attention. The walk to the train was pleasant. The lanes lined with hedges and late-blooming flowers. St. Mary Mead was waking up. Mrs. Price swept her doorstep. Tommy kicked a ball with his dog. The postman waved as he pedaled. Bye? Miss Marple nodded politely, her face calm, but her mind was racing. She pictured Lila at the garden party, all smiles and emerald silk, eyes darting to Tom. She thought of the notes, threatening words in scratchy ink, and the stolen brooch, watch, and scarf. And Mr. Hero, dead too soon, his heart. Attack too convenient. It's a puzzle, she thought, but I've solved puzzles before. The train station was small, just a platform and a ticket booth. Miss Marple bought her ticket, chatting with the clerk about the weather to seem ordinary. The train chugged in, puffing steam, and she climbed aboard, settling by a window. As the countryside rolled by fields, cows, little villages she let her thoughts wander. Lila was clever, no doubt. She'd won over the village with cakes and choir songs, but Miss Marple saw through it. Charm was a tool, and Lila used it like a knife. Was she after Tom's inheritance? Or something Mr. Harrow had hidden? Maybe those notes were her doing, a way to scare people into paying her off. But murder. That was a big leap, and Miss Marple needed proof. Much Benham was louder than St. Mary Mead, with cars honking and shops crowded along the main street. Miss Marple stepped off the train, her scarf snug against the breeze, and headed for the high street. She knew exactly where to go. A little shop called Madame Claire's, tucked between a bakery and a shoe store, sold wigs and costumes, mostly for theater folks, but also for anyone needing a change. Her friend Dolly Bantry had told her about it years ago after a fancy dress party where Dolly went as a pirate queen. They've got everything, Jane, Dolly had said. You could be a duchess or a chimney sweep. Miss Marple didn't need anything so dramatic, just enough to fool Lila. The shop bell jingled as she stepped inside. The air smelled of lavender, and mothballs, and shelves were piled with wigs, hats, and racks of dresses. A young woman with red lipstick smiled from behind the counter. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her voice cheerful. Miss Marple smiled back, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm visiting friends," she said, "and I'd like a new look, something different. A wig, perhaps, and a dress. Oh, and glasses, if you have them." The woman, whose name tag read Elsie, nodded eagerly. "We've got plenty. What sort of look? Elegant? Modern?" She tilted her head, sizing Miss Marple up. "Modern, but not too fancy," Miss Marple said. "I'm a widow, you see. Just wanting a bit of fun." She kept her tone light, like she was planning a lark, not a secret mission. Elsie didn't need to know the truth. Elsie led her to a row of wigs on wooden stands. There were curls, bobs, long waves, in every color: blonde, black, red, even purple. Miss Marple's eyes landed on a gray bob, short and sleek, nothing like her own fluffy white hair. "That one," she said, pointing. Gray would keep her looking old, but the style was sharp, like something a city woman might wear. Perfect for a disguise. Elsie lifted the wig and set it on Miss Marple's head, tucking her real hair underneath. The mirror showed a stranger older, but with a spark of style. "Suits you," Elsie said, adjusting the bangs. Miss Marple nodded, pleased. The wig changed her face, made her cheekbones stand out, her eyes sharper behind her spectacles. Nobody in St. Mary Mead would guess it was her Dot. Next came the clothes. Miss Marple usually wore tweed and wool, sensible and plain. For her disguise, she needed something bolder. Elsie pulled out a floral dress, bright with pink and yellow blooms, the kind of thing a chatty aunt might wear. It was loud, nothing like Miss Marple's usual style, which was exactly the point. She tried it on in a tiny dressing room, the fabric swishing as she moved. In the mirror, she looked like a different person, Foozy. Maybe a bit silly. Not the keen-eyed spinster who noticed everything. "Perfect," she said, smoothing the skirt. Glasses were last. Miss Marple's own spectacles were thin and silver, barely noticeable. She chose a pair with thick black frames, the lenses plain glass so she could still see. They made her eyes look bigger, her face softer. She turned her head, studying the effect. "Nobody will know me," she thought, a thrill running through her. Even her nephew Raymond, who teased her about her sharp mind, would walk right past. Elsie packed the wig, dress, and glasses in a sturdy box, adding a cheap brooch for flair. "You'll be the talk of your friends," she said, ringing up the total. Miss Marple paid, her face calm, but inside she was buzzing. This was the first step, and it felt right. She thanked Elsie and left a box under her arm, her steps light despite the weight. Outside, Much Benham hummed with life. Shoppers bustled, kids darted through the crowd. A street musician played a jaunty tune. Miss Marple stopped at a cafe for tea, giving herself time to think. She sat by the window, the box at her feet, and sipped her Earl Grey. Her new persona needed a name, something ordinary, not too memorable. Agnes Poole, she decided. Mrs. Agnes Poole, a widow visiting St. Mary Mead for her health, fond of gossip and sewing. Agnes would be chatty, a bit nosy, the kind of woman nobody took seriously. Lila wouldn't suspect her, and neither would the village. She pulled a small notebook from her purse and jotted down her plan. Train back. "Tell Mrs. Clement I'm visiting cousin. Tomorrow sewing circle is Agnes. Watch Leela, listen. Ask about Harrow." She tucked the notebook away, her mind turning to Lila. At the garden party, Lila had been all charm. But her eyes gave her away, always scanning, always calculating. That locket story was a lie. Miss Marple was sure. Was Lila after something in Mr. Harrow's house? Or was she covering up something worse? Poison, maybe? To fake a heart attack? Miss Marple had read about such things in her nephew's detective novels. It wasn't so hard if you were clever. The train ride home was quiet. The box on the seat beside her, St. Mary Mead, looked the same as she stepped off Cottage's church steeple, the green where kids played. She walked home, nodding to neighbors, her story ready if anyone asked. "Off to see my cousin," she told Mrs. Price, who was weeding her garden. Mrs. Price nodded, not curious, and Miss Marple smiled. The village saw what it wanted to see. A harmless old lady, nothing more. In her cottage, she locked the door and opened the box. The wig, dress, glasses, and brooch lay inside, waiting to transform her. She tried them on again, standing before her bedroom mirror. The floral dress swished. The wig sat snug. The glasses made her look owlish. She practiced her voice, pitching it higher, adding a giggle. "Oh my, what a lovely village," she said, testing the words. Then she stooped a little, rounding her shoulders to seem frail. In the mirror, Agnes Poole stared back, a stranger with a silly smile. "Even Raymond wouldn't know me," she chuckled. She took it all off, folding the dress carefully, hiding the wig in a hat box. Tomorrow, she'd slip out early, change at the station, and walk to the sewing circle as Agnes Leela would be there, needle in hand, charming the group. But Agnes would be watching, asking innocent questions, listening for slips. "What did you think of poor Mr. Harrow?" she'd say. Or, "Have you seen that nice boy Tom?" Lila's answers would tell her plenty, even if they were lies. Miss Marple sat by the fire, a cup of tea in hand, her mind sorting clues. The notes, the thefts, Mr. Harrow's death, Lila's charm. Tom's fear they were threads in a tangled scarf, and she was the one to untangle it. Her disguise was the key, a way to pull those threads without being seen. She sipped her tea, the fire crackling, and felt a spark of pride. "You may fool the village, Mrs. Vance," she thought, "but you won't fool Agnes Poole." Outside, the village settled into night, stars peeking through the clouds. Miss Marple locked her notebook in a drawer, her plan clear. Tomorrow, she'd step into her new skin and start digging. For Mr. Harrow, for the truth, for St. Mary Mead. Because no matter how clever a killer was, they couldn't hide from Jane Marple. Not forever. Chapter 4. Agnes Poole makes her debut. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting soft light on the floral dress and gray wig laid out on her bed. Today was the day. She'd become Mrs. Agnes Poole, a chatty widow nobody would suspect, and slip into the sewing circle to watch Mrs. Lila Vance up close. Her heart gave a little jump, not from fear but from the thrill of the chase. Lila was hiding something, maybe a murder, maybe theft, maybe both, and Miss Marple was determined to find out what. Her disguise was her secret weapon, and she was ready to play her part. She'd slept soundly, her mind buzzing with plans. The garden party had shown her Lila's charm was a mask. And those quick glances at Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's nephew, were no accident. The story about a locket Mr. Harrow promised her. Pure nonsense, Miss Marple thought. Mr. Harrow wasn't the gift-giving type, especially not to a newcomer like Lila. The missing brooch, the threatening notes, Mr. Harrow's sudden death, they all pointed to trouble, and Lila's polished smile was at the center. Today, at the sewing circle, Miss Marple would get closer, listen hard, and look for cracks in Lila's act. She rose early, before the village stirred, and dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan. Nobody could know she was up to anything. She tucked the floral dress, wig, glasses, and brooch into a plain shopping bag, along with a shawl to cover her shoulders. Her story was ready. She was off to visit her cousin in Much Benham again. A harmless errand. She locked her cottage, patted the roses by the door, and walked to the train station, her steps steady. The bag swung lightly in her hand, a secret only she knew. The station was quiet, just a few early travelers waiting. Miss Marple bought a ticket, chatting about the chilly morning with the clerk, to seem ordinary. The train rattled in, and she found a seat by the window, the bag on her lap. As fields and cottages zipped by, she thought about her new persona. Agnes Poole was a widow, visiting St. Mary Mead for her health, fond of gossip and needlework. She'd be nosy but sweet, the kind of woman people humored but didn't fear. Lila wouldn't see through her, not if Miss Marple played it right. At Much Benham, she slipped into the station's tiny restroom to change. The floral dress swished as she pulled it on, its bright pinks and yellows loud against her usual grays. She tucked her white hair under the gray bob wig, adjusting it until it sat snug. The thick black glasses went on last, making her eyes look big and owl-like. She pinned the cheap brooch to her shawl and stooped her shoulders, practicing her walk. In the cracked mirror, Agnes Poole stared back, a fussy old lady with a silly smile. "Perfect," Miss Marple whispered, her voice higher and giggly. Even her nephew Raymond wouldn't know her now. She left her tweed clothes in the bag, stashed it in a station locker, and caught a bus back to St. Mary Mead. The sewing circle met at the village hall. Short walk from the bus stop. As she shuffled along, her shawl tight against the breeze, she tested her new voice. Such a darling village, she said to a passing milkman, who tipped his cap and smiled. Nobody looked twice. She was just another old lady, no one to notice. The village hall was a squat brick building with ivy on the walls. Inside, a dozen women sat around a long table, their needles flashing as they stitched quilts and chatted. The air smelled of tea, and lavender and laughter filled the room. Lila was there, in a blue dress that looked too fancy for sewing, her dark hair swept up. She was helping Mrs. Baker thread a needle, her smile warm, her voice smooth. Miss Marple paused at the door, her heart steady. "Here we go, Agnes," she thought, and stepped inside. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, spotted her first. "Oh, hello, you must be new," she said, bustling over. "Welcome to our little circle." Miss Marple bobbed her head, her glasses slipping a bit. "I'm Agnes Poole," she said, her voice high and cheery. "Just visiting for my health. You?" "No, I do love a bit of sewing, so I thought I'd pop in. Is that all right?" She giggled, clutching her shawl like a nervous ant. "Of course." Mrs. Clement beamed. "Come sit, I'll get you some tea." She led Miss Marple to a chair across from Lila, who looked up with a polite smile. Miss Marple smiled back, her face all innocence. But inside she was watching. Lila's eyes flicked over her, sizing her up, then softened. She saw nothing to worry about, just a silly old woman. Good. The women welcomed Agnes warmly, asking where she was from, why she'd come to St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple spun her story icily. Her husband had passed. Her doctor suggested fresh air. She loved villages and gossip. "Oh, I do like a good story," she said, giggling again. The women laughed, charmed by her chatter, and Lila joined in, offering her a scone. "You'll fit right in, Mrs. Poole," Lila said, her voice like honey. Miss Marple nodded, her glasses wobbling, and took the scone. "Thank you, dear," she said, her eyes sharp behind the lenses, as they sewed. The talk turned to village news, the school fair, the church roof, Mr. Harrow's death. Miss Marple saw her chance. "Oh my, I heard about that poor man," she said, her needle pausing. "What happened? Was he sick?" She looked around, wide-eyed, like she was hungry for gossip. Mrs. Baker leaned in, her voice low. "It was his heart, they say. Dropped dead in his parlor all alone. Such a shame." The women nodded, murmuring, but Lila stayed quiet, her needle moving fast. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Did he have many friends?" she asked, her tone light. "I do love hearing about folks." Lila looked up, her smile tight. "He was a quiet man," she said. "We talk sometimes about his roses. He didn't go out much." Her words were smooth, but her fingers fumbled her thread, a tiny slip. Miss Marple nodded, her face bland. "A poor dear," she said. But her mind was racing. Lila was nervous, just for a moment. "Why?" The talk moved on, but Miss Marple kept steering it back, dropping questions like crumbs. "Was he married?" she asked, and learned Mr. Harrell's wife died years ago. "Did he have family?" She prodded, and heard about Tom, the nephew who'd inherited everything. Each time, Lila answered carefully, her smile never slipping, but her eyes stayed sharp. Watching Agnes, Miss Marple played her part, giggling and fussing with her thread, looking harmless. But she saw everything Lila's quick glances, the way she changed the subject when Mr. Harrow came up. Then Mrs. Price mentioned the missing brooch, her voice sharp. "It's not just mine. Mr. Tuttle's watch, my sister's scarf, things keep vanishing." The women gasped, and Miss Marple seized the moment. "Oh my, that's awful," she said, her glasses slipping again. "Any idea who's taking them?" She looked at Lila, her face all concern. Lila's smile flickered just for a second. "Probably some naughty boys," she said, laughing. "Villages have their mischief, don't they?" The women nodded, but Miss Marple caught the strain in Lila's voice. She was covering something, maybe fear, maybe guilt. Miss Marple filed it away, her needle moving slowly as the circle broke for tea. Lila stood to help Mrs. Clement, her blue dress swishing. Miss Marple watched her slip a small notebook into her bag, a quick move most would miss. But not Agnes. "Pool? What's that?" Miss Marple wondered. "Recipes, or something darker, like a list of secrets." She needed to see it, but not today. Today was for watching, for planting seeds. She chatted with the women, her high voice bubbling, but her eyes stayed on Lila. When Lila laughed with Mrs. Baker, her hand touched her bag like she was checking the notebook was safe. When she poured tea, her smile was perfect. But her shoulders were stiff. She was on guard, Miss Marple thought, but not enough. The circle ended at noon, the women packing their needles and quilts. Lila said goodbye to everyone. Her charm turned. "Up high, so nice to meet you, Mrs. Poole," she said, shaking Miss Marple's hand. "I hope you'll come again." Her grip was firm, her eyes searching, but Miss Marple just giggled. "Oh, I will, dear," she said, her glasses wobbling. Lila smiled and left, her bag clutched tight. Miss Marple lingered, helping Mrs. Clement tidy up, her mind sorting clues. Lila's fumble with the thread, her flicker of unease, that notebook, they were pieces of the puzzle. The sewing circle had been a gold mine. Lila was careful, but not careful enough. And Tom Harrow, mentioned in passing, was still a question mark. Was he a victim, or did he know something? She'd have to find out, but as Agnes, not herself. She left the hall, her shawl snug, and caught the bus back to Mach Benham. In the station restroom, she changed back into her tweed, tucking Agnes away in the bag. The wig itched, the glasses pinched, but they'd done their job. On the train home, she stared out the window, thinking, Lila was at the heart of this, maybe stealing, maybe blackmailing, maybe worse. That notebook was key, and Miss Marple would see it. One way or another, back in St. Mary Mead, she walked to her cottage, nodding to neighbors, her face calm. Inside, she locked a door and unpacked her disguise, hiding it in a cupboard. She lit the fire, made tea, and sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The village looked peaceful, but she knew better. Leela was out there thinking she was safe. Not for long, Miss Marple thought, her needles clicking. Agnes Poole was in play, and the game was just beginning. Chapter 5. A Dangerous Discovery. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow. But inside Miss Jane Marple's cottage, a quiet storm was brewing. She sat by her fire, her knitting untouched, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the notebook. In her lap, not Lila Vance's notebook that was still a secret tucked in Lila's bag, but her own, filled with neat handwriting about Mr. Harrow's death, the stolen brooch, the creepy notes, and Lila's suspicious charm. Yesterday's sewing circle, where Miss Marple had played Mrs. Agnes Poole, had been a success. She'd seen Leila's nerves, caught her quick glance at that mysterious notebook, and confirmed her suspicions. Leila was hiding something big, maybe even murder. Now, Miss Marple needed to get closer, and that meant taking a risk. The sewing circle had shown her Leila's cracks or fumble with the thread. Her tight smile when Mr. Harrow's name came up. That notebook slipped into her bag with a careful hand was the key. Was it a diary? A list of victims? Miss Marple's mind spun with possibilities. She'd also noticed Leila's cottage, mentioned in passing by Mrs. Clement, was filled with fancy things, silk curtains, a silver tea set far too grand for a widow on a modest income. She's not what she seems, Miss Marple thought, her fingers tapping the notebook, and I'm going to prove it. Her disguise as Agnes Poole had worked perfectly. Nobody, not even Leila, suspected the chatty widow was the village's sharpest mind. But watching from the sidelines wasn't enough anymore. She needed to see that notebook, maybe even search Lila's cottage. The thought made her heart skip, not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. Jane, you're getting bold, she chuckled, but her eyes were steely. If Lila had poisoned Mr. Harrow, staged his heart attack, or was behind the thefts and notes, Miss Marple couldn't let her slip away. Her chance came sooner than expected. Mrs. Clement stopped by that morning, her face flushed with excitement. We're planning a charity bazaar, she said, sipping tea in Miss Marple's parlor. Leila's offered to help organize it. Such a dear. We need volunteers to sort donations at her cottage tomorrow. Can you come, Jane? Miss Marple's heart leaped, but her face stayed calm. I'm afraid I'm visiting my cousin again, she said, her voice mild, but I'll try to pop in later. Inside, she was buzzing. Leila's cottage. It was the perfect chance to snoop as Agnes, not Jane. She spent the evening preparing. The floral dress, gray wig, thick glasses, and brooch were ready, hidden in her cupboard. She practiced her Agnes voice high, giggly, a bit silly until it felt natural. Oh my, what a lovely cause, she said to her mirror, stooping her shoulders. The disguise was more than clothes. It was a whole new person, one Leila wouldn't suspect. She packed her shopping bag, her plan clear. Take the early train to Mach Benham, change at the station, bus back as Agnes, and join the bazaar volunteers. She'd watch Lila, maybe find a way to glimpse that notebook, or even spot something in the cottage that didn't belong. The next morning, she was up before dawn, the village still asleep. She locked her cottage, the bag under her arm, and walked to the station, nodding to the milkman as he passed. The train ride was quick, her mind on Leela, at Much Benham. She slipped into the station restroom, transforming into Agnes's pool. The floral dress swished, the wig sat snug, the glasses made her eyes big and harmless. She checked her reflection, giggling in her high voice. Nobody will know, she thought, stashing her tweed clothes in the locker. The bus to St. Mary Mead dropped her near Leela's cottage, and she shuffled up Lilac Lane, her shawl tight against the morning chill. Lila's cottage was picture perfect, with roses climbing the walls and a neat gravel path. Inside, it was even grander, polished wood floors, velvet chairs, a crystal vase on the table. Miss Marple, as Agnes, blinked in mock awe. "Oh my, what a lovely home," she said, her voice bubbly. Lila smiled, welcoming her with a tray of biscuits. "Thank you, Mrs. Poole," she said, her blue dress as elegant as ever. "We're so glad you could help." Mrs. Clement and two other women, Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Price, were already there. Sorting clothes and knickknacks for the bazaar, the group worked in the parlor, chatter filling the air. Miss Marple kept her eyes on Lila, who was all charm, laughing and handing out tea. But her bag, the one with the notebook, sat on a side table, never far from her reach. Miss Marple's fingers itched to look inside, but she bided her time, folding scarves and giggling at Mrs. Baker's gossip. "Such a shame about that brooch," she said, her tone innocent. "Any news on who took it?" Mrs. Baker sighed, shaking her head, but Lila's smile tightened, just for a second. Miss Marple saw it, her heart quickening. Her chance came when Mrs. Clement asked Lila to fetch more boxes from the attic. Lila hesitated, glancing at her bag, then nodded and left the room. The other women were busy, their heads bent over piles of hats. Miss Marple seized the moment. "Oh, my shawl slipped," she said, standing and stumbling toward the table, her glasses wobbling. Her foot accidentally nudged Lila's bag, and it tipped, spilling a comb, a handkerchief, and the notebook onto the floor. "Oh, dear me." Miss Marple gasped, bending to pick them up, her hands quick but shaky. She opened the notebook for a split second, her eyes scanning a page. Names, dates, sums of money, Mr. Harrow's name among them, with 500 next to it. Her heart pounded. Blackmail, extortion. She snapped it shut, tucking it back with the other items just as Lila's footsteps sounded on the stairs. Marple shuffled back to her chair, her face flushed but innocent. "Clumsy old me," she giggled, fanning herself. Lila returned, her eyes flicking to the bag, but she said nothing, her smile back in place. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Miss Marple sorted donations, her mind racing. That notebook was proof Lila was up to no good. But what? Had she blackmailed Mr. Harrow, then killed him when he wouldn't pay? Poison could mimic a heart attack. She'd read about it in her nephew's books. The stolen brooch, watch, and scarf might be part of it, maybe sold for cash or used to scare people, and those notes with their scratchy threats. Lila's work to keep the village jumpy. But she needed more than a glimpse to be sure. She watched Lila closely, noting every move. When Lila laughed, it was too loud, like she was trying to hide her nerves. When Mrs. Price mentioned Tom Harrow, saying he looked peaky, Lila's hand froze on a teacup just for a moment. "Poor boy," Lila said, her voice smooth. Losing his uncle must be hard. But her eyes were cold, and Miss Marple knew. Lila was watching Tom, maybe even threatening him. Was he next? The bazaar work wrapped up by noon, the women chatting. As they left, Lila walked Miss Marple to the door, her charm turned up high. "You're such a help, Mrs. Poole," she said, her hand light on Miss Marple's arm. "Come back tomorrow, won't you?" Miss Marple giggled, her glasses slipping. "Oh, I'd love to, dear," she said, but inside she was cold. Leela's touch felt like a snake's, and that notebook burned in her mind. She caught the bus too much Benham, changed back into her tweed, and took the train home. In her cottage, she locked the door and sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote what she'd seen. Lila's notebook names, money, Harrow included, blackmail. Cottage to fancy, not widow's income. Nervous when Tom mentioned. She tapped, her pen thinking. The notebook was the heart of it, but getting it again would be tricky. Lila would be more careful now, maybe even suspicious. And confronting her was out of the question. If she'd killed once, she could kill again. Miss Marple sipped tea, her eyes on the flames. She needed a new plan, something to trap Lila without putting herself in danger. Maybe a rumor, something. To make Lila slip up, she could spread it as Agnes. Say Mr. Harrow left a letter about a friend who betrayed him. If Lila took the bait, she might reveal herself. Or Miss Marple could talk to Tom, see if he knew about the blackmail. That was risky too. He might be involved. Or too scared to talk. The village was quiet outside, stars twinkling above the cottages. Miss Marple closed her notebook, her mind made up. Tomorrow she'd go back as Agnes, keep up the act, and plant that rumor. She'd watch Leela's face, see if it shook her. And she'd find a way to get that notebook, even if it meant more accidents. Because one thing was clear, Lila Vance was dangerous, and Miss Marple was the only one who could stop her. She stood, her knitting untouched, and looked out the window. "You think you're safe, Mrs. Vance?" she thought, her voice a whisper. "But Agnes Poole is watching." The fire crackled, and Miss Marple smiled, her heart steady. The game was getting dangerous, but she'd played it before. And she always won. Chapter 6. The trap is set that the evening shadows stretched long across St. Mary Mead. But Miss Jane Marple's cottage glowed with purpose. She sat by her fire, her knitting idle, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the notebook where she'd scribbled her latest clues. The glimpse of Lila Vance's notebook, yesterday names, dates, sums of money. Mr. Harrow's name among them had lit a fire in her. Lila was no innocent widow. She was a schemer, maybe a killer, and that notebook was proof. The fancy cottage, the stolen brooch, the threatening notes. Mr. Harrow's too convenient heart attack, they all pointed to Leela. But a glimpse wasn't enough. Miss Marple needed to catch her, and that meant setting a trap. Her disguise as Mrs. Agnes Poole had worked like a charm. At the sewing circle and the bazaar sorting, Lila hadn't suspected the chatty, giggly widow was the village's sharpest mind. But Miss Marple couldn't keep sneaking glances at notebooks or hoping for accidents. She needed Lila to slip up to show her hand. The idea had come last night as she sipped tea by the fire. A rumor carefully spread that Mr. Harrow had left a letter accusing a friend of betrayal. If Lila was guilty, it would rattle her, maybe push her to act. And Miss Marple, as Agnes, would be there to watch. She'd spent the morning planning, her mind as sharp as her knitting needles. The rumor had to be subtle, believable, something the village would gossip about without questioning. She'd drop it at the sewing circle tomorrow where Lila would hear it. If Lila panicked, searched for the letter, confronted someone, or even fled, it would be a sign of guilt. But Miss Marple needed more than a reaction. She needed proof, something to tie Lila to the blackmail, the thefts, or Mr. Harrow's death. That meant getting closer to Tom Harrow, the nervous nephew who'd inherited everything. Was he a victim, like his uncle, or did he know something? She'd have to find out. Her plan wasn't without risk. If Lila was a killer, she'd be watching for trouble. One wrong move, and Miss Marple could be in danger. But the thought didn't scare her. Made her pulse quicken, like when she was young and solved her first village mystery. "You're a bold one, Jane," she murmured, a smile tugging her lips. She checked her disguise, the floral dress, gray wig, thick glasses, and brooch, all ready in her cupboard. Tomorrow, she'd slip out early, change in much Benham, and return as Agnes. The sewing circle was her stage. And Lila was the star whether she knew it or not. She rose before dawn, the village still wrapped in sleep. Her shopping bag held the disguise, her tweed coat hiding her purpose. She locked her cottage, the roses by the door nodding in the breeze, and walked to the station. The milkman waved, used to her visits to her cousin, and she smiled back, her face calm. The train to Much Benham was quiet, just a few farmers and shopgirls. She sat by the window, her bag on her lap, thinking about Lila, that notebook. With Mr. Harrow's name and 500 beside it, screamed blackmail. Had he paid her, then refused, leading to poison? Miss Marple had read about toxins that mimicked heart attacks, colorless, tasteless, deadly. It fit too well in Much Benham. She slipped into the station restroom, transforming into Agnes Poole. The floral dress swished. The wig sat snug. The glasses made her eyes big and harmless. She stooped her shoulders, practiced her giggle, and checked the mirror. "Nobody will know," she whispered, her high voice perfect. She stashed her tweed in a locker and caught the bus back to St. Mary Mead, her shawl tight against the morning chill. The village hall where the sewing circle met was just a short walk, and she arrived early. Her heart steadied inside. The hall smelled of tea and starch. The long table set with needles and thread. Mrs. Clement was arranging scones, her face bright. "Mrs. Poole, you're back," she said, waving Miss Marple to a chair. "We love your company." Miss Marple giggled, her glasses wobbling. "Oh, you're too kind," she said, settling in. Lila arrived soon after in a lavender dress that turned heads, her dark hair swept up. She smiled at Agnes, her eyes warm but sharp, like she was always calculating. Miss Marple smiled back, her face all innocence, but inside, she was ready. The women chatted as they sewed, their needles flashing. Miss Marple waited, picking her moment. When Mrs. Baker mentioned the bazaar, she saw her chance. "Oh my! All this talk of charity reminds me," she said, her voice high and gossipy. "I heard the strangest thing at the post office. They say Mr. Harrow left a letter, locked in his old desk, about a friend who wasn't so friendly. Can you imagine?" She giggled, fanning herself, her glasses slipping. The room went quiet, needles pausing. Mrs. Clement gasped. "A letter? What kind?" Mrs. Baker leaned in, her eyes wide. "Who was the friend?" Miss Marple shrugged, her face bland. "Nobody knows, dear. Just gossip, I suppose. But they say it's full of secrets." She glanced at Lila, her eyes hidden behind the glasses. Lila's smile froze, her needles still, her face pale for a heartbeat before she laughed. "Village rumors," she said, her voice light. "People love a story." But her hand shook just a fraction and Miss Marple saw it. The talk moved on, but Miss Marple kept watching. Lila sewed faster, her lips tight, her eyes darting to the door. "She's rattled," Miss Marple thought, her heart quickening. The rumor had hit its mark. Now, she needed to see what Lila would do. Would she search Mr. Harrow's house for the letter? Confront Tom? Or would she run? Miss Marple's fingers moved slowly, her quilt forgotten, her mind on the trap. She needed an ally, someone to watch Mr. Harrow's house. Tom was the obvious choice, but could she trust him? He was scared. That much was clear from the garden party. But was it fear of Lila or guilt over something else? She decided to take a chance. That afternoon, she'd find him, reveal her true self, and ask for help. It was risky, but she had no choice. The notebook, the rumor, the trap, they were all leading to a showdown. And she needed eyes where she couldn't be. The sewing circle ended at noon, the women packing up. Lila was all charm again, saying goodbye, but her eyes were distant, like her mind was elsewhere. "See you at the bazaar, Mrs. Poole," she said, her smile forced. Miss Marple giggled, nodding, but her stomach was cold. Lila was spooked, and a spooked fox was dangerous. She left the hall, caught the bus to Much Benham, and changed back into her tweed. On the train home, she planned her next move. Find Tom, set the trap, and wait. Back in St. Mary Mead, she walked to the green, where Tom often sat reading or staring at nothing. He was there on a bench, his lanky frame hunched, his face pale. Miss Marple approached, her tweed coat plain, her voice. "Soft, Tom. May I sit?" She asked no trace of Agnes. He looked up, startled but nodded. She sat, her eyes kind but firm. "I'm Jane Marple," she said. "I think you're in trouble and I want to help." Tom's eyes widened, his hands twisting. "I don't know what you mean," he mumbled, but his voice shook. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice low. "I know about Leila Vance, Tom. I think she hurt your uncle, and maybe you're next. I'm trying to stop her, but I need your help." She told him everything, her disguise, the notebook, the rumor watching his face. He went paler, his eyes darting, but he didn't run. I didn't know," he whispered. "Uncle said she was trouble, but I thought he was paranoid. Then he died, and she kept asking me about his things, like she wanted something." Miss Marple nodded, her heart steady. "Will you help me?" she asked. "I think Lila will try. To find that letter tonight at your uncle's house. Watch the place and tell me what she does." Tom swallowed, his hands shaking, but he nodded. "'Kay," he said. "I'll do it." She gave him a gentle smile, her mind racing. The trap was set. That night she'd wait near Mr. Harrow's house, hidden in the shadows, with Tom inside. She'd written a fake letter full of vague accusations and planted it in the desk, just in case Lila got that far. If Lila showed up, it would be proof she was scared, proof she was guilty. And Miss Marple would be there, watching, ready to pounce. She walked home, the village quiet, the stars bright above. In her cottage, she locked the door and checked her disguise, ready for tomorrow's sewing circle. The floral dress, the wig, the glasses, they were her armor, and Agnes Poole was her sword. She sat by the fire, her notebook open, and wrote, "Rumor spread, Lila rattled." Tom agreed to watch. Letter planted, tonight, the trap. She closed the book, her eyes on the flames. "You're clever, Mrs. Vance," she thought, "but I'm one step ahead." The night was still, the village asleep. Miss Marple slipped out, her dark coat blending with the shadows, and made her way to Mr. Harrow's house. Tom was inside, his face pale but determined. She hid behind a hedge, her heart steady, her eyes on the lane. If Lila came, she'd see. Her, if she searched, she'd find the letter. And if she ran, Miss Marple would know why. The trap was set, and the truth was close. All she had to do was wait. Chapter 7. The confrontation. The night was dark in St. Mary Mead, with only a sliver of moon to light the lanes. Miss Jane Marple crouched behind a thick hedge near Mr. Harrow's house, her dark coat blending into the shadows. Her heart beat. Steady, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the path leading to the old stone cottage. The trap was set. She'd spread the rumor about a letter Mr. Harrow left, accusing a friend of betrayal, and Lila Vance had taken the bait. Miss Marple knew. The sewing circle had shown Lila's nerves, her pale face, her shaky hand, and now. Just past midnight, Miss Marple was sure Lila would come, sneaking into the house to find that letter. And Miss Marple would be waiting. Inside the house, Tom Harrow, Mr. Harrow's nephew, hid in the parlor, his lanky frame tense, but ready. Miss Marple had told him everything that afternoon, her disguise as Agnes Poole. The notebook she'd glimpsed with Mr. Harrow's name and money amounts, her suspicion that Lila had blackmailed and maybe killed his uncle. Tom's face had gone white, but he'd agreed to help, his fear mixed with anger. She kept asking about Uncle's things. He'd said, "I thought she was just nosy, but maybe you're right." Now he was her eyes inside, watching. For Lila, while Miss Marple watched from out here. The fake letter was in place, tucked in Mr. Harrow's old oak desk in the study. Miss Marple had written it herself, her neat handwriting mimicking Mr. Harrow's from a grocery list she'd seen. I know what my friend has done. Lies and greed, I won't stand for it. If anything happens to me, this letter will tell the truth. It was vague, just enough to scare Lila, and locked in a drawer with a key Tom had left in plain sight. If Lila broke in, she'd find it, and her reaction would be proof of her guilt. Miss Marple's plan was simple but sharp, like her. Knitting needles, she'd catch Lila in the act, then call the police. But first, she needed to see it happen. The night was quiet, the village asleep. Crickets chirped, and a soft breeze rustled the hedge. Miss Marple's knees ached from crouching, but she didn't move, her eyes locked on the lane. She thought of Lila's notebook names, dates, sums of money. Mr. Harrow's name with 500 beside it. Blackmail, she was sure. Lila had probably squeezed money from him, maybe over a fake scandal, and when he fought back, she'd poisoned him, staging a heart attack. The stolen brooch, watch, and scarf. The threatening notes, they were all part of Lila's game, keeping the village scared and distracted. But Miss Marple wasn't scared. She was ready. A faint crunch of gravel made her breath catch. Someone was coming. She peered through the hedge, her glasses tucked away to see better in the dark. A slim figure in a hooded coat moved down the lane, steps quick and careful. The hood hid the face, but Miss Marple knew that walk, graceful, like a cat. It was Lila. Her heart thumped, not with fear, but with certainty. Got you, she thought, her lips twitching. Lila paused at the gate, glancing around. The street was empty, the cottages dark. She slipped through, her coat brushing the iron bars, and crept to the side door. Miss Marple had told Tom to leave it unlocked, just enough to tempt her. Lila tried the handle, hesitated, then pushed. It opened, disappearing inside. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on the hedge. The trap was sprung. Now she had to wait onside. Tom was hidden behind the parlor curtains. His instructions clear. Watch, don't act, and signal Miss Marple if Lila found the letter. She'd given him a small flashlight to flash twice from the window. Miss Marple shifted, her eyes on the study window, where a faint glow flickered. Lila, using a torch to search. Minutes dragged, the night heavy with silence. Then a shadow moved in the study, and Miss Marple saw Lila's silhouette at the desk, rifling through drawers. The key must have caught her eye, because the glow steadied. And Miss Marple heard a faint click, the drawer opening. Her heart raced. Lila had the letter. Would she read it and run? Destroy it? Or would she stay, searching for more? Miss Marple waited, her breath shallow. Then, 2 quick flashes from the parlor window. Tom's signal. Lila was holding the letter, reading it. Miss Marple stood, her knees creaking, and moved closer, staying low. 'Twas time. She slipped through the gate, her dark coat a shadow, and crept to the side door. Inside, the house was still, the air thick with dust and old wood. She heard a rustle from the study and moved toward it, her steps silent on the rug. The door was ajar, and through the crack she saw Lila, her hood down, her dark hair loose. She clutched the letter, her face pale in the torchlight, her eyes wide with panic. "No," Lila whispered, crumpling the paper. He couldn't have known. Miss Marple pushed the door open, her voice calm but firm. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance." She stepped into the light, shedding her coat to reveal her tweed skirt and cardigan. No trace of Agnes Poole. Lila gasped, stumbling back, the letter falling to the floor. "You?" she choked, her hands shaking. "How?" Miss Marple stood tall, her eyes like steel. "I've been watching you," she said. "Agnes Poole was a useful friend, but I'm Jane Marple, and I know what you've done." She gestured to the letter. "That was just a lure. But your notebook names? Money. Mr. Harrow's name, that's real. You blackmailed him, didn't you? And when he wouldn't pay, you poisoned him." Lila's face twisted, fear turning to fury. "You're mad," she snapped, but her voice cracked. I didn't kill anyone. She lunged for the door, but Tom stepped out, blocking her path. His face was pale, his hands clenched. Stay where you are, he said, his voice shaky but firm. Leela froze, trapped between them, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. Miss Marple picked up the crumpled letter, smoothing it. You came for this, she said. Why? Because you knew Mr. Harrow suspected you. His death wasn't a heart attack, was it? You used something clever, maybe a drug, something to stop his heart and leave no trace. She stepped closer, her voice steady. And the brooch, the watch, the notes, they were yours too, to scare people, to keep them off balance while you worked. Lila laughed, but it was shrill, desperate. You've got no proof, an old lady's guesses, that's all. She clutched her bag where Miss Marple knew the notebook was. I'm leaving, and you can't stop me. Miss Marple didn't flinch. I saw your notebook, she said. Names, amounts, dates. Mr. Harrow paid you, but he stopped, didn't he? He was going to tell someone, maybe the police. So you silenced him. She nodded to Tom, and now you're after Tom for his money or his silence. Ah, but you're done, Mrs. Vance. The police will want that notebook. Lila's face crumpled, her charm gone. I didn't mean to. She sobbed, sinking to her knees. It was just money. He was going to ruin me, said he'd tell everyone I was a fraud. I gave him something to calm him, that's all. I didn't know it would kill him. Tears streaked her face, but Miss Marple's eyes were cold. Lila's story was half-truth, at best. Calm him with poison. She'd meant to kill, or close enough. Tom stared, his face a mix of shock and anger. You killed my uncle, he whispered, for money. Lila shook her head, sobbing, but Miss Marple raised a hand. Enough, she said. Tom, fetch the constable. He lives 2 doors down. Tom hesitated, then ran his footsteps echoing. Lila lunged for her bag, but Miss Marple stepped on it, her foot firm. Not this time, she said, her voice like iron. Lila slumped, defeated, her sobs filling the room. Miss Marple stood watch, the notebook under her foot, the fake letter in her hand. Her trap had worked. Leela had come, panicked, confessed. But the confession wasn't enough. The notebook was the real prize, and Miss Marple would hand it to the police along with Lila. She thought of Mr. Harrow alone in his parlor, betrayed by a woman he'd trusted. You thought you were clever, she said softly, but you forgot one thing. St. Mary Mead has eyes. The constable arrived, a burly man with a lantern, Tom behind him. What's this, Miss Marple? He asked, his eyes wide at Lila's crumpled form. Miss Marple explained, her voice clear. The blackmail, the notebook, the poison, the trap. She handed him the fake letter and pointed to Lila's bag. You'll find proof in there, she said. Names, money, crimes. The constable nodded, hauling Lila to her feet. She didn't fight, her face blank. Her fight gone. As they led her away. Tom turned to Miss Marple, his eyes wet. Thank you, he said. I didn't know. I should have listened to Uncle. Miss Marple patted his arm, her smile kind. You did right tonight, she said. Go home, Tom. Rest. He nodded, shuffling off, and Miss Marple stepped into the night, her coat pulled tight. The village was still, the stars bright above. She walked home, her steps slow but sure. In her cottage, she locked the door and sat by the fire, her notebook open. She wrote, Lila caught, confessed to blackmail. Claims accident. Notebook with police. Trap worked. She closed the book, her eyes on the flames. Sobs echoed in her mind, but she felt no pity. A killer, even a crying one, was still a killer. She thought of Agnes Poole, the giggly widow who'd fooled them all. The floral dress, the wig, the glasses, they'd done their job. Tomorrow, she'd return to Mach Benham, store them away, and be Jane Marple again. But tonight, she was the woman who'd outsmarted a schemer, saved a boy, and avenged a man. You almost won, Mrs. Vance, she whispered, but not quite. The fire crackled and Miss Marple smiled, her heart light. The truth was out, the village safe. She'd sleep well tonight, her knitting waiting for tomorrow. In St. Mary Mead, no secret stayed hidden not from Jane Marple. Chapter 8. The Final Piece. The morning sun crept over St. Mary Mead, painting the cottages gold and chasing away the last shadows of the night. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles clicking softly, a cup of tea steaming on the table. The village was quiet again, its usual hum of gossip and chores returning after the storm of Leila Vance's arrest. Last night's confrontation at Mr. Harrow's house had been a triumph. Leila caught. Her notebook seized, her confession spilling out like water from a cracked jug. But Miss Marple's work wasn't done. She needed to be sure every piece of the puzzle fit, that Lila's crimes were fully exposed, and that St. Mary Mead was truly safe. Her sharp blue eyes glinted with purpose as she sipped her tea, her mind as busy as her needles. Lila's sobbing confession had been a start she'd admitted to blackmail, claiming Mr. Harrow's death was an accident, a dose of something to calm him gone wrong. Miss Marple didn't buy it. Lila was too clever, too careful to make such a mistake. Poison, chosen to mimic a heart attack, was no accident. The notebook, now with the police, held names and sums, proof of her schemes. But Miss Marple wanted more. She wanted the truth about the stolen brooch, the threatening notes, and whether Lila had planned to target Tom Harrow next. And she needed to know Lila's past. Had she done this before? In other villages, under other names. Miss Marple's trap had caught the fox, but the den still needed clearing. She'd slept little, her mind turning over the clues. The garden party where Leila's charm hid her sharp glances at Tom. The sewing circle, where her fumble with a thread betrayed her nerves. The bazaar, where Miss Marple, as Agnes Poole, had glimpsed the notebook secrets. And last night, when Lila sneaked into Mr. Harrow's house, panicked by the rumor of a letter, only to face Miss Marple's calm accusation. Each step had been a stitch in a quilt, and now Miss Marple was sewing the final seams. She'd called her old friend, Inspector Craddock from Scotland Yard, first thing this morning. He was on his way, eager to hear her story and dig into Lila's history. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he'd said over the phone, his voice warm. She'd smiled but said nothing. The job wasn't finished yet. Her knitting paused as she glanced at her notebook, open on the table. She'd written last night's events in her neat hand. Lila caught, confessed blackmail, claims, accident. Notebook with police, Tom safe. Now she added, Craddock coming. Check Leila's past, poison, thefts, notes. She tapped her pen, thinking. The stolen brooch, watch. And scarf. Had Lila taken them to sell, or to scare people into paying her? The notes with their scratchy threats felt like her work too, a way to keep the village jumpy. And Tom, so nervous at the garden party, had Leila been pressuring him, maybe hinting at what she'd done to his uncle? Miss Marple's lips tightened. She'd find out, one way or another. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, her face a mix of shock and excitement. "Jane, is it true?" she asked, stepping inside. "They're saying Leila Vance was arrested last night for Mr. Harrow's death." Miss Marple nodded, pouring her a cup of tea. "It's true," she said, her voice mild. "She was up to no good, I'm afraid," Mrs. Clement gasped, sinking into a chair. "But she was so kind. The choir, the bazaar, how could she?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Charm hides many things," she said. "But it can't hide forever." She told Mrs. Clement a simplified version: Leila's blackmail, the notebook, the trap leaving out her disguise as Agnes Poole. The village didn't need to know that part. Mrs. Clement listened, wide-eyed, then shook her head. "You're a wonder, Jane. Nobody else suspected a thing." Miss Marple shrugged, her needles clicking again. "I just noticed what's there," she said, but her eyes twinkled. Mrs. Clement left. promising to spread the news, and Miss Marple turned back. To her tea satisfied. The village would talk, but Lila was done. Now it was time for the final piece. Inspector Craddock arrived by noon, his car crunching up the lane. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a sharp mind, though he often teased Miss Marple about her village sleuthing. She welcomed him in, setting out biscuits and more tea. "Tell me everything," he said, notebook ready. Miss Marple did, starting with the garden party and ending with last night's confrontation. She described Lila's charm, her notebook, the rumor that lured her to the house, and the fake letter that sealed the trap. Craddock listened, scribbling, his face serious. "You took a risk, Miss Marple," he said. "She could have been dangerous." Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. "I had Tom Harrow inside, and I knew she'd come. Fear makes people sloppy." She handed him a list of clues, the stolen items, the notes, Lila's fancy cottage. "Her interest in Tom. Check her past," she said. "I'd wager she's done this before, blackmail, maybe murder, in other towns." Craddock raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. He knew better than to doubt her. He left to meet the local constable who had Lila in custody and the notebook in evidence. Miss Marple stayed home, her knitting steady, but her mind followed Craddock. She pictured him flipping through the notebook, matching names to victims, checking police records for Lila's aliases. She thought of the poison something rare, maybe from a pharmacy bought under a false name. And she thought of Tom, safe now, but shaken. He'd need time to heal, too. Trust the village again by evening. Craddock returned, his face grim but satisfied. "You were right," he said, sitting in her parlor. "Lila Vance isn't her real name. She's Laura Vane, known in 3 counties for fraud and blackmail. She'd cozied up to rich loners, dig up their secret sore, make them up and squeeze them for cash. When they fought back, she'd vanish. We found a pharmacist in Much Benham who sold her a heart-disrupting drug enough to kill. She claimed it was for sleep issues, but the dose matches what could have stopped Harrow's heart." Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing, and the thefts. The notes. Craddock leaned back, sipping tea. "The brooch and watch were found in her cottage, hidden in a jewelry box. The scarf's still missing, but we think she sold it. The notes were hers, same ink, same paper as her notebook. She used them to scare people, make them think someone was watching. It kept them from suspecting her." He shook his head. "She's a piece of work, charged with murder, blackmail, and theft. She won't wriggle out of this." Miss Marple's lips twitched, a quiet pride in her chest. "And Tom?" she asked. Craddock's face softened. He's shaken, but relieved. He gave a statement Lila kept asking about his uncle's papers, hinting she knew things. He was too scared to talk until you stepped in. He smiled. "You saved him, Miss Marple. Maybe the whole village." She waved a hand, her face mild. "I just saw what was there," she said, but her eyes sparkled. Craddock finished his tea and stood. "We'll need you to testify," he said. "But for now, rest. You've earned it." He tipped his hat and left his car rumbling away. Miss Marple sat back, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a clock. The village buzzed with the news, neighbors stopping by to gape and gossip. Mrs. Baker swore she'd never trusted Lila. Mrs. Price claimed she'd seen her sneakiness all along. Miss Marple listened, nodding, her face calm. She didn't mention Agnes Poole, the floral dress, or the wig hidden in her cupboard. That was her secret, a tool she might need again. Instead, she poured tea, offered biscuits, and let the village talk itself out. By afternoon, she walked to the green, her straw hat shielding her eyes. Tom was there, sitting on a bench, looking less haunted than before. She sat beside him, her smile kind. "You did well, Tom," she said. "Your uncle would be proud." He blushed, his hands twisting. "I was scared," he admitted. "But you weren't. How do you do it?" Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes on the roses across the green. I watch, I listen, and I trust my instincts, she said. People can't hide who they are, not forever. Tom nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Thanks, Miss Marple, he said. She patted his arm and left him to his thoughts, her heart light. Back home, she sat by her window, knitting a pink scarf, the village settling into dusk. The puzzle was complete. Lila or Laura Vane, exposed as a blackmailer and murderer. The notebook thefts and notes tied to her crimes. Tom safe, the village at peace. She thought of her disguise, the thrill of being Agnes, the moment Lila's face crumpled in the study. You almost fooled us, she murmured, her needle steady, but not quite. She opened her notebook, adding a final entry. Lila charged. Real name, Laura Vane. Poison confirmed, thefts recovered, notes hers, village safe. She closed it, tucking it away, and sipped her tea. The fire crackled, the evening soft outside. St. Mary Mead was itself again, its secrets laid bare. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. Evil could hide in charm, but it couldn't hide from her. Not in her village. Not ever.